Thank you very much, Kazuya, for your very nice and generous introduction. Today, I'm presenting work in progress that my colleague Parvaneh Tavakoli and I have done. And it's interesting to see that this is the second talk, collaborative work between a university in the UK and Western University in Canada. To give you a background to the talk, task difficulty and task complexity are two crucially important constructs in task-based language teaching, task-based language research, and task-based language assessment. These two constructs are particularly important because it is assumed that characteristics of a task affect language performance and can help drive language development forward. In other words, by manipulating certain characteristics, we can facilitate second language acquisition. From a language pedagogy perspective, this is a very important topic because we believe that second language teaching should aim towards facilitating language learning, and therefore characteristics of tasks seem to be very important for both teaching and assessment. And in teaching, different areas would benefit from this, for example, syllabus design. The two constructs that I just referred to, task complexity and task difficulty, are used quite differently in the field, with some people using them in very distinct senses, whereas others may use them interchangeably. Generally speaking, I come back to this later on about the distinction of these two constructs, but to give you a background, task complexity is generally considered about the challenges and demands a task may have when you put the learner outside this. So you talk about the complexity of the task without particularly looking into the learner's perspective or the teacher's perspective. Whereas task difficulty, you more or less looks at the perceptions of task difficulty from learners or teachers. Apart from the sections that I focus on models of task complexity and I tease out the differences between complexity and difficulty, for the rest of the talk, I would use these terms interchangeably. Again, to give you a background, the topic of task difficulty has been an important topic in task-based language teaching for reasons of grading and sequencing tasks in language teaching. There has been a lot of interest in earlier research during the 1980s and 70s and 80s from different researchers. A summary of what affects task difficulty is provided in the relevant literature, but they suggested characteristics such as the linguistic complexity of the input, the amount of input, the challenge involved in performing a task as indicators of task difficulty. This interest was sort of faded away for a period of time, but then in the 2000s, more researchers joined and investigated task difficulty. And you can see more recent research from my colleagues, Andrea Revesz in this room, and my other colleagues, Prefontaine, and Judith Kormus in 2015. These studies have taken three different approaches to investigating task difficulty. A number of studies have looked into empirical aspects, operationalizing task difficulty, or manipulating task difficulty. But other studies have focused on what learners consider as difficult and what teachers consider as difficult. Recently, Elise Atal in their work 2019 clearly suggested that the grading and sequencing tasks remain a major challenge in task-based language teaching. So there has been some research, but that research has not been conclusive and that research is not enough. So they are clearly indicating the need for future research. And they say perhaps the best that can be done is that take some concepts from these research findings, but teachers should use their intuitions and experiences in order to guide their choice of the task in their syllabus. So in other words, they are reflecting or highlighting the need for knowing more about teachers' intuitions and experiences. Peter Skien, in his work in 2018, also suggests that we need a system, we need a model, we need a framework in which we can start working on tasks, analyzing them, comparing them, and if possible at all, providing a set of principles according to which we can sequence and order the tasks. So we have two models of task difficulty in the field of task-based language teaching. These two models have a lot of similarities and some differences. A key similarity is that they're both based in cognitive approaches to language teaching and learning. So they draw on similar principles, but they consider somehow different assumptions. Also, they have different predictions about what performance you can expect when you manipulate task complexity. For reasons of scope, I'm not going to focus on their predictions of performance or what impact task complexity might have on performance for the purpose of this talk. I start with the first model proposed by Skien, limited attentional capacity. This model presumes that attentional resources and working memory are limited, but these limitations, attentional limitations, are only a constraint rather than inevitability. In this model, Skien proposes that task complexity should be viewed from different categories of cognitive complexity, code complexity, and communicative stress. In cognitive complexity, we could have cognitive processing that refers to the online processing, the challenges involved in online processing of information, and cognitive familiarity that allows or limits someone from access to pre-packaged and formulaic solutions that they can have for performing a task, when performing a task. Code complexity refers to linguistic challenges and demands, and communicative stress refers to the kind of characteristics related to the conditions under which one performs a task that might have an impact. The communicative pressure, the number of participants involved, the number of elements of things expected to do. Peter Skien also provides a list of principles that should be considered when looking into task complexity, and it starts from limitations of working memory and attentional resources being limited. But the last principle that he mentions is important to this talk because he suggests that task difficulty needs to be analyzed according to the two stages of speech production in Level's model, conceptualizer and formulator. And if you remember, Andrea was referring to this model before. I will show you a summary of the stages of Level's model later on when I connect our work with it. The other model of task complexity that has been quite dominant in the field is Robinson's cognition hypothesis. Unlike Skien, Robinson believes attentional resources are not limited in the way Skien presumes them. He believes there are different pools of attention available to learners, and therefore performing a task, they can resort to these different pools of attention. He defines complexity, task complexity in terms of task complexity, task difficulty, and task condition. So task complexity basically refers to, in Robinson's model, refers to the cognitive challenges involved. Task difficulty refers to learners' perspectives and the individual differences between learners. And task condition refers to the conditions under which tasks are referred. The distinction between resource directing and resource dispersing factors are also important, because he suggests that resource directing variables direct our resources and encourage speakers to perform their best possible performance, whereas resource dispersing variables can help to disperse the resources and can be a very useful source. Before moving on to show you the study, I want to make this point that the purpose of our study was not to see whether our findings fit in with either of these models. And when we collected the data and analyzed the data, we were not trying at all to fit our findings into these two models. But as you can see, the kind of early conclusions that we arrive at is that parts of our work may fit within one of these two models. So the study I'm presenting here is only part of a larger project that we have been involved in. The main aim of the project was to develop a better understanding of early career teachers, pre-service teachers, perceptions of task. How do they perceive a task? And how do they perceive task difficulty? And also we wanted to see how training can change them. But the data that you see here is just at the beginning of the study. So whatever the teachers say here is before they have received any training. For the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on one research question, and that is, what criteria do pre-service English language teachers consider when analyzing task difficulty? The participants are 120 pre-service teachers of English enrolled on an MA TESOL course in a university in Canada. The course was 2 years, and these students were on their final term of their course. It was an international cohort, but the majority were Chinese L1 speakers, and their proficiency level was B2 C1. We had a questionnaire, open-ended and close-ended questions, different format of questions involved, investigating the conceptualizations of the construct of task difficulty, demographic information. But again, the research question here today only focuses on their analysis of task difficulty, which I'll show you in a moment. The data analysis, we have adopted a bottom-up approach to analyzing our data. And we have taken a content analysis approach, looking for themes and sub-themes and the frequencies. This is the section relevant to task difficulty. We gave them 2 sets of tasks, and we asked them to decide, number 1, which task was the most difficult, and number 2, why they found this task most difficult. We also give them a description of the learners, who the learners were, because we thought it would give them a bit more feeling of being authentic about what they were doing. So a bit of background, some instructions, and these are the first set of the 3 tasks. The choice of task was determined by a number of factors, including familiarity of the teachers with these things. They were all speaking tasks, and we wanted to tap into a wide range of tasks because we wanted to get as many reasons for task difficulty as possible. But obviously, you could include any other tasks here. This was the first set of the 3 tasks, and then we had the second set of the 3 tasks, section B, and these are the 3 tasks in the second part. So the data analysis, we have analyzed only data from 25 participants. As I said, it's work in progress. So we have got 50 sets of answers. Any key information that the students provided, we put it into an Excel sheet. We didn't give them any limitations. They could provide as many reasons as they could, but majority of teachers provided 3 reasons. The range was between 2 and 5. So we ended up in a data set. We analyzed small samples, and it was a very time-consuming and labor-intensive process to get to this stage. We hope it is easier from now on. We met every week. We spent hours to analyze the data, and what you see is 100% agreement. So 143 key pieces of information, 138 of them have been coded. There were 5 pieces of information we couldn't really understand, and we wish we had retrospective interviews with the learners. 6 broad categories came up: linguistic demands, cognitive operational demands, task informational demands, task design general, learner background, and communicative demands. And the numbers you see is the frequency of referring to such main themes within the data. So to show it to you visually, as you can see, the frequencies are considered here. So the linguistic demands was the highest frequently mentioned theme, to communicative demands, which was only mentioned 6 times, surprisingly. So I'm going to give you examples from the data and the subcategories that emerged. So for example, linguistic demands, familiarity with discourse or genre, vocabulary, grammar, output demands, or specific skills or language. You can see that reference to output demands or specific language skills, or generally reference to the language requirement, was the most frequent subtheme. Cognitive operational demands, we were very surprised to see how many references these teachers made to the cognitive operational demands. It was really surprising for us, but you can see reasoning was the most frequently mentioned subtheme, but organization of thought, idea generation, the need for decision making, they were all important subthemes. Task informational demands. So whether the information provided in the task was clear and sufficient, amount of information provided in the task, was it enough and understandable, close-endedness, open-endedness, and task familiarity, whether they were familiar with content and processes. So task design general, these are things that refer to when they considered the tasks sort of in isolation, when they separated it from other things that they were discussed before. Interestingly, they refer to taskness. You know, this is not something they do in their real life. So therefore, this must be not very easy for them. Learner background, they refer to issues such as, you know, levels of proficiency. And, you know, the data suggested that this is not linguistic demand. We don't want to call this linguistic demand. This is generally the level of proficiency. And communicative demands. So to sum up, we have results that can take us further to the existing models, you know, we can see some synergy between our findings and what Skien suggests. So, for example, code complexity relates to our linguistic demands. Skien's cognitive complexity also relates to our work in cognitive operational demands and task informational demands. It was interesting to see that communicative stress, what Skien calls communicative stress, relates to both task design general factors for us. So, for example, how many, what Skien calls scales, or how many elements, how many different things to do are there, is considered communicative stress in Skien's model. Our teachers refer to that as features of task design. And learner background that is not available in Skien's model seemed to be something that our teachers were considering. Skien has asked the researchers in this area to link task difficulty to Level's model. As Andrea said, Level's model includes 3 stages of conceptualization, formulation, and articulation. Conceptualizer in charge of generating pre-verbal message, formulator in charge of putting the message into language. And this has given us some food for thought to see how we can link our work to these areas of speech production. Skien himself has done a kind of planning, sketching his model of task difficulty to Level's model of speech production. And what I can say is that this is work in progress. We can't really give a finalized idea of where our schemes would link to conceptualizer, but easily it is perceived that cognitive operational demands and task informational demands link to conceptualizer, and communicative demands and linguistic demands link to formulator. But I can see communicative demands can affect conceptualizer as well. And probably learner factors can also affect a conceptualizer. So, as I said, this is food for thought for us. What we're doing next is limitations of the study. As I said, you may think, why didn't we do interviews? Unfortunately, we didn't do retrospective interviews with the teachers to ask for elaboration for their work. Also, a limitation of our study is that these are pre-service teachers. We wish we had also, maybe this is next study, some more experienced teachers. We have more data to analyze, and it is likely that more themes would emerge. We need to examine the data quantitatively to see which task receives the highest ranking of difficulty. And then we would like to see how our teachers responded to our training in this area. So at this stage, I would like to stop and to thank you very much for listening to this talk before lunch.